limits of size are the maximum and minimum sizes permitted for a specific dimension. Okay? Limits of size are the maximum and minimum sizes permitted for a specific dimension. Now, tolerance is the total permissible variation in part size. Okay, so we'll say that again. Tolerance is the total permissible variation in part size. And you may ask, well, how do we figure out what the tolerance is? How do we know what the tolerance on a feature is? Well, we determine the tolerance of a part by looking at the difference between the limits of size. So we talked about two things here already, limits of size and tolerance. Well, if tolerance is the total permissible variation, how much that part is allowed to be away from this nominal size, then we have to know, well, if you told me that this part is allowed, has a tolerance of 50 thousandths of an inch, 0.05, what does that mean for me? How big or how small am I allowed to make this? Remember, tolerance is the total permissible variation. So I'm telling you that this part can be 50 thousandths of an inch difference. The tolerance is 50 thousandths of an inch. Well, if that's the total amount, then it's either 4.05, it could be made, or perhaps it's 3.95, that's 50 thou smaller, or is it 4.025 and 3.975? Can you be 25 thou bigger and 25 thou smaller? So that's what we're talking about when we're talking about the limits of size. So let's just look, for example, at this 4-inch dimension for a second. If this feature was allowed to vary in size and could still function as required when it's as large as 4.05 and as small as 3.95, okay, so if it could still function at 50 thou bigger, 4.05, or 50 thou smaller, 3.95, then this dimension could be replaced by the limits of size and be written on the print instead of how we saw it, right? We saw it as 4.00. But if there is a difference of plus 50 thou or minus 50 thou, then that means that the tolerance is the total permissible variation. So if I said to you 4.05 is the largest, we can make this overall length, and 3.95 is the smallest, what is the tolerance? Well, the tolerance is the total permissible variation. Therefore, it's 100 thou, right? The tolerance on this overall length is 0.1 because it can be 50 thou bigger or 50 thou smaller. So it has a total permissible variation or a tolerance of 100 thou. So that's important to remember, okay? The definition of these terms are very, very important to grasp those concepts. So this particular style of tolerancing, okay, this style of tolerancing is called limits of size. Okay, limits of size. So remember, if we look back at this 4-inch dimension, that's the basic size. That's the target size. That's what we want to try and achieve. But because we can't make anything to an exact size, I have to attach some sort of tolerance, what I'm going to tolerate, what I'm going to put up with, and this part will still work. So I'm saying that, okay, this part will still work if it has a 100 thou tolerance. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, okay, there is a 100 thou tolerance, but I'm going to tell you what the largest size you can make this and the smallest size, because I could say it's got a 100 thou tolerance, and you could come back and say, well, I made it at 4.1. That's 100 thou. if I don't tell you that, well, it can be 100 thou, but it can only be 50 thou one way or the other, that's got to be clear to you, right? So we call this style of tolerancing the limits of size, right? Where you physically will put the largest size and the smallest size stacked just like that on the print. And you would always put, when you're dimensioning with limits of size, you're always going to put the larger dimension over top of the smaller dimension. That's important. Otherwise, it's not correct.